way to giggle. Nobody to designate a giggle at the beginning of the show. Weird. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cubist. My name is Bill Corey. I am the Cubist, and tonight we talk farming. Right? Farming? Is this actually talking farming? Or is this talking gaming about farming? Whatever. Close enough. It is time for the comeback of the deep dive segment. We haven't done a deep dive in a couple of months, and so it's time to bring it back with the Uwe Rosenberg classic Agricola. But first, let's introduce our panel. First, as always, I try to get this mangled metaphor, and I screw it up every time. What did I always say? The Ed McMahon to my Arsenio Hall? Is that what it was?
Something to that man.
Something along those lines. Mr. Brandon Kemp. Hello, sir.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right. How's everybody doing?
Excellent. Speaking of the everybody, I'm just going to work from my right to my left because it's easier that way. Mr. Jason Dinger is with us today. Hello, Jason. Oh, Jason, you're muted. Jason says hello and wishes us all a fantastic evening.
Are we back?
There you are. Hello, sir.
Yeah, I hit a button there, I guess.
It is what it is. Hit the button. We also have Mr. Chris Wray is here with us. Hello, Chris.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. All right. So Jason and Chris are here because they are the biggest Agricola fanboys that we could find, as far as I understand it. And also both friends of the show. I've had to, Chris, I think I gamed with you when I came down for that game day in the creepy church basement.
Yes, that was about a year ago now.
All right, yeah, it was. And then Jason, you and I have spoken a bunch on Twitter specifically. As a matter of fact, I'm the proud owner of one of your famous whatever dice trays, one of your awesome dice trays that you make. So you super nice guys. So both friends of the show. This is going to be a lot of fun. It is time to talk Agricola after we talk about what we've been playing lately. So we have to talk about something that is not Agricola, guys. So Chris, how about you start us off? What have you played lately?
So I'm going to start off with the classic Princes of Florence. It's got to be 15 years old at this point. And we don't get it to the table that often, but I always love it when we do. Princes of Florence has a little bit of everything. There's auctions, there's a little bit of set collection, and then there's polyominoes you're building on a board. It's really a masterpiece. I think it's still probably in the Board Game Geek Top 100. And I just loved it. We hadn't played it in probably 3 or 4 years, but I was really excited to get it back to the table, and it really holds up. So I'm vowing to get Princes of Florence back to the table more often.
It's 109.
It's number 109? Okay.
Oh, it fell out of the top 100. Okay.
So for those of you, I can actually help with this one. You want to give a quick elevator pitch. What is Princes of Florence like for people that maybe have never seen or heard of it?
So I'll give you sort of the two versions of the tale. Basically, you are in I don't know what to say, medieval Europe, the Renaissance age in Europe, and you have these profession cards, and the profession cards each list different things that the professions want to attract to Florence, and if they get it, then they complete a great work. So if you are the jurist, for instance, you might want a certain right, like freedom of religion or freedom of travel or freedom of opinion. And then you also want a certain landscape type around it, and then you want certain buildings. And if you get all those things completed, you put the card on the table. That's the work. It's done. You can either score victory points or money. Now, you need money in the game for the auctions. You want the victory points because those help you win. And the game is all about, in my opinion, weighing your choices between victory points and money. And if you do that well, then you tend to do pretty well in the game. I think one of the criticisms of Princes of Florence is it feels like you have a solo puzzle in front of you. And it's true that each player does have their own board with their own polyominoes. A lot of people have said it's the game that broke the hobby because it went with that multiplayer solitaire. But I don't think that's true, and I always really enjoy the game.
Wow. Okay, so I've heard the multiplayer solitaire thing ascribed to a number of games, actually. Puerto Rico is the one that I've heard a lot of people ramble on and on about as far as multiplayer solitaire, which I've always thought was kind of BS. But I like this one fits it, I think, a little bit better. Although it's an auction game, right? So there's three major aspects of it. There's an auction, and then there is the spatial element of trying to fit all the poly. By the way, extra points for using the word polyominoes in a sentence unironically. Well done. And then there's also, like you said, the figuring out how to get the cards to the table and deciding whether to take points money or what balance of the two. There's sort of like three kind of wheels that are all sort of interlocking there. So I would argue that only one of them is really solo-y, right? Because all the cards are unique. If I have it, you don't. So there's an aspect of that too.
Yeah, it's true. And I've always thought if a game has an auction mechanic, it cannot be multiplayer solitaire. I mean, there is nothing more interactive in a game than an auction.
Yeah,
so I don't buy that view. But if there's fun articles on it, you can find online describing Princes of Florence as, and I'm quoting, the game that broke the hobby.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. All right. So on the Cubist scale for Princes of Florence, buy it, play it, forget it, or burn it.
Buy it.
Buy it, yeah. I agree. I used to have this game, and I traded my copy to somebody that was just more in love with it than I was. And I really like the game, but it's one of those games. I'm one of those people that if I teach a game to somebody and they fall head over heels, I will usually end up with that game in their possession by the time I'm done, because I have walls of games that I enjoy playing, right? So if I teach you something and you really love it, unless it's one that I also am having a torrid love affair with, I will probably leave it with that person. That's what I did with this one. I really need to replace it, though. It's really good. Oh, by the way, hello, chat room. How's it going? I like that most of the time co-host Patrick Hillier is in the chat room with his usual role of official mispronouncer of names in text format this time. This is good. It's a Wolfgang Kramer game, right? But he typed it terribly. So if you're not in the chat, you're missing out, folks. I'm just throwing that out there for the audio folks later. Jason, what have you played lately?
Lots of different things, but two I was going to talk about, two smaller games. Sure. One is Gammon, which was a free game with the Hollandspiel Christmas sale, the holiday sale they had. You buy 2 games, you get this one free. And it's designed by Tom, who owns Hollandspiel. It's 2 pages, the rule book and the map. And then you supply, discs of 2 different colors, 12 discs and 2 dice. And it used the backgammon mechanic of rolling 2 dice. And then each one is if you roll doubles, then you can do 4 moves, or otherwise you do 2 separate moves. And the map has roads and difficult terrain. Roads take 1 to traverse, difficult terrain take 2. And when you use the number on a die, you have to use it completely. So you're trying to most efficiently with the dice you roll, move around to either surround the opponent's capital, or to have either eliminate them or have twice as many units as they have. There's some neat little mechanics in it as far as how you get reinforcements. Once a piece is eliminated, it's gone. It's not backgammon, which is what I'm really impressed about. It was inspired by it, but it's really a miniature little 15 to 20 minute war game that, like I said, I think he's going to make a P&P for it because it was just a free giveaway.
And what's it called?
Napgammon, Napoleon.
Napgammon. Okay.
Napgammon, yeah.
Okay. Because a couple people in the chat were asking, and so I looked up on BGG. I just typed in gammon, figuring, okay, good. Well, it'll come up in there, right? And there, you'd be amazed how many gammon games there are. But Napgammon is not one of them. So it doesn't have a BGG entry.
I thought it did. Maybe it doesn't.
Right, well, we can't find it, but
it just came out like at Christmas.
All right.
Yeah.
Well. Hang on, let me see if I can find it here. All right, so that sounds awesome, though. It's inspired by wow, holy crap, there goes my mouth. It's inspired by backgammon, but isn't a clone. It's sort of a 2-player war game thing, right?
It absolutely is a 2-player war game. That's why I'm impressed by it, by how much gameplay is in that little bit. And like I said, I've played backgammon when I was younger. I'm not really drawn to play it. We've played this 6 times in 2 weeks, and I want to play it again tonight. Nice. if we can. So.
Yep. Yes, I found it now that I God bless America, Patrick. Patrick with his mispronouncing. Napgammon does indeed show up. Designed by Tom Russell, not Trom Ruzel. Patrick, you're terrible. That's awesome. The chat room is where it's at tonight for sure. So, all right, Napgammon. This is a game that you said was all right. Now help me out here. This is something that you can buy, yes, or?
He will be making a P&P that you can buy, I think, in the next month or so. Okay. But what he does every year, they have a holiday sale, and if you buy 2 games, you get whatever. He designs a mini game or like maybe an expansion map or something like that you get for free.
Gotcha. Okay. So, very good. So let's assume that for the people in the future are watching the show and have like this has already come into existence as something you can buy. In that case, is Napgammon to buy it, play it, forget it, or burn it?
Oh, it's a buy it.
To buy it. It sounds really cool. I like backgammon. I'm terrible at it. Like and I always want to just do, well, it's a dice game, it's locked forever. And I know that's not it. I know that I am just objectively bad. But I've always enjoyed the game, and I like the idea of taking sort of the basics of that and turning it into something that is that completely transforms it. That sounds awesome.
And I don't dislike backgammon. I just played a lot when I was younger. It's one of those I'm not itching to play again, you know. And like I said, he took that mechanic, but gave it a very fresh feel.
Gotcha. If I recall correctly, isn't Rich Summers a big backgammon nut, isn't he? I think he's talked about it on Cardboard fairly often. So yeah, very cool. Yeah, and I'm looking at pictures of it. That's actually a really nice. That's a neat looking game too, just for a piece of paper. Very cool. All right, Brandon, you don't want to talk about a game, you said. Do you change your mind?
Nope, I'm good. We're not going to talk about anything like Dragon's Gate College and small, tiny text.
You're doing it right now. Now you have to do it.
No, I don't.
Ah, I hate you. Fine. We're going to make him talk about Dragon's Gate College next time he's on the show, because I've been waiting to talk about it until you've had a chance to play it, because I've played it a bunch. You know what? Screw you. I'm going to talk about Dragon's Gate College from NSKN Games as my game that I have played fairly recently, because I want you to actually be a part of the show, Brandon.
I am a part of the show. I just chose to bypass this portion.
Don't fight with me. You can't. So Dragon's Gate College is a 2 to 4 player game set in a fantasy world where each player is running a college trying to train adventurers. You're either going to train wizards, warriors, or rogues. And you're going to do so by hiring teachers that have specific skills, so they will add to the ratings of students. Will have innate strengths and weaknesses in 3 different stats, each stat corresponding to one of those 3 things. So if they have lots of brawn, as an example, then they will trend towards being a warrior. And effectively what you're doing is those students, if you have teachers that add to them and buildings in your school that add to their stats, you can buy their stats up to a point where you can claim tokens from boards that have different, like one token might require you to have 4, a ranking of 4 in whatever your primary stat is, and rankings of 2 in the other 2 stats. And if you have a student that meets those criteria via what you can do with your school, then you get you can claim that disc, which will be worth some victory points. And there's a set collection aspect to it as well. The game is a dice drafting game mechanically. So there's a pool of dice in the middle. You roll them at the beginning, and then in turn order, you'll choose a die out of that set and use the die to take an action. And that action can be getting money, or completing a goal, or buying, luring more students to your school, or hiring more teachers, or buying buildings, or going through the training dungeon, or whatever. There's lots and lots of little dealios that you can do here. And at the end of, I believe it's 5 rounds of the game, the person that has gotten the most victory points is the winner. The conceit of the game, however, is that the dice start off mostly neutral in there, and you can replace them with dice of your color. And if anybody chooses a die of your color, then you also get to take an action after they're done. So if I draft, let's say, a blue die, which is Jason's color, out of there, I will get to take an action with whatever number is on that blue die, and then Jason will also get to take an action immediately afterwards. So you're trying to get your color dice into that center pool, but you have to give up an entire action in order to do so. So you're effectively betting earlier actions on the fact that you'll get later actions and get to make up for them later on in the game. But then you lose sort of an early mover advantage, right? You're giving up those actions, so you're foregoing early opportunities. The game, let's see, the good part, I feel like it's a lot of fun. Like it's just got a good fun factor, right? It's pretty easy to understand if you have somebody that's read the rule book well and has already slogged through like the 3 or 4 rule book problems that it has, where it doesn't explain a couple things real well. The graphic design needs some pretty serious help in a couple really key spots. There are some buildings that are income sources but are not marked as so, and other buildings that are not income sources that look just like the ones that are income sources, which is super annoying. That's dumb. And they used like 6-point font on these tiles that are like half a table away from you that they want you to read. The board is gigantic. Yeah, the board is huge, and it's really pretty. Like, it's gorgeous, and I love what they did with the board, but they didn't.
It's brown.
They didn't know it's pink, dude. It's like 8 shades of pink. It's a really cool, like, it gives off sort of this. I really like the aesthetic, but the issue is, if the board is going to be big, then everything else needs to be big, and the text isn't big, and that's an issue. That makes the game not unplayable, but it adds an extra level of, can you please hand me the teachers and students so I can read them, because I happen to be sitting over here instead of over there.
Yep.
Also, there is an unnecessary amount of replayability. The deck of wizard cards is way too thick.
Oh, God. Yeah, we maybe went through 6 of them, and there's got to be like 80, 90 cards.
They give you a full deck of cards for a game where you're going to flip, I think, at best, 12.
Oh, wow.
Like,
yeah, there was 3 of us, and we got through maybe 6.
If every there's 4. No, there's 3 tiers, right?
Yeah.
And there's 3 wizards per tier. So the most cards that you'll ever flip, plus a couple that you can get in other spaces,
I think it's from buildings, you can get from other things.
Yeah, but not many. I think it's I literally think it's 12 cards total. So you could play this game 6 times and never see the same card twice. But you also wouldn't get an awesome feeling of, ooh, that's a neat twist, because the cards are kind of boring. So it's just like a sort of, well, I mean, they are. They're like, here's some free stuff. Great.
Yeah.
That's not worth adding all that extra nonsense.
Yeah.
So it is a solid play it. I'm glad I own it, because I thought Molly really enjoys it, but I cannot say this is one you need to go run right out and get if it comes to the States. I don't even know if it's going to. Is it?
It is. NSKN will bring it. They do everything. If you like Harry Potter and you like the idea of kind of competing school factions, the theme will seem fun. I kind of tried to sell it with the flavor and everything to Gabby, and she looked at me and she said, "This sounds like Harry Potter. I don't like Harry Potter." And so that was it. So Corinza kind of thought it was, and I'm trying to get her to talk about it on the podcast, but she didn't really kind of say why, but she thought it was boring. And it didn't seem that bad to me. I thought it was interesting with the dice allocation, how you start out with all the neutral ones and you can add in, but my family didn't pick my die. They would just take their own actions and say, screw it, I don't want the extra stuff. So
weird. How many times did you get a chance to play it?
We just played it once so far. So.
I think I've got about 5 games in at this point.
Yeah.
Molly really liked it, and it plays okay at 2. It's definitely better at 4. Like, at the full player count, it is much more interesting.
Yeah.
But
it did seem to play a little bit long, but it was fun. It was fine. I liked it. The whole how you train your apprentices up, how you enrich their studies, was convoluted. They could have made that easier.
But the rulebook's bad.
Well, yeah, the rulebook is weird. It's NSKN, so it's a bit weird anyway. But
yeah, I think.
But it is what it is. And it's a definite play. I'll make
weird
Chris
is a kind word for bad.
He can shun me after it. So.
Yeah, it's good. It's just not great. I think it's fine. I think it's definitely one you should try. But yeah, it's really good.
Sorry, I was out of the chat. It is not Azul Brown, and it is a tan. I for some reason I'm not seeing the pink hues, but maybe
seriously, the one that I saw, it looked very pink, like it was.
Gotcha.
So there you go. All right, very good, and thank you, Chris. I agree. Weird is the kind word for bad. I like that. When it comes to rule books, not for games. The games, it's a whole different ballgame. But rule books shouldn't be weird. Rule books should just teach you how to play. All right, enough of this nonsense. Let's talk about let's get to the main course, which is Agricola.
I got to feed my workers.
There you go. Go feed your workers. For those of you that have been living under a rock for the last 10 years and have never heard of this game, this is the first, I think people used to call it the farming trilogy of games from Uwe Rosenberg, right? Because it was this, then Caverna, then Ora at Labora, or did Ora come second? No, Ora was third, right? Am I incorrect? Help me out, guys.
I don't remember where Ora came.
Killing me.
I got Aura 2 weeks ago.
Okay,
I love it. And I love what's going on here with our expert panel here.
Yeah,
but
expert panel. It's a weird panel. Wait, no.
I've never played Caverna, and I was told that from people I trust, that because I love Agricola so much, I would not like Caverna.
Yeah.
Because it takes away all the things I love about Agricola.
Well, we'll talk about that later on because we'll do the big comparison of all the farming games later on in the discussion. But before we get too far, this is the first of the farming games. I've said this on this show a bunch, is that I feel like we have been watching Uwe Rosenberg's development arc over the last 10 years. I feel like we have been watching him iterate and take a design and then say, okay, now what if I do this with it? So we had Agricola, which is a farming game where you have family members, which are workers, that you place them on spaces, and they are going to allow you to gather resources or play cards or expand on your house, which might let you have more workers or build paddocks or get animals or whatever. And after every certain number of rounds, you will have to feed your family. So the more workers you have, the more food you will require. And food is kind of hard to get in Agricola. So you have to sort of be thinking about that in addition to other pointsy kind of things. And then at the end of, I think it's 14 rounds. Is that right? That sounds right.
Yes.
At the end of 14 rounds, the game will end and you'll evaluate whoever, and you have to have sort of a well-rounded farm, right? Like you're going to lose points if you ignored anything. Well, I mean, that's what the scoring system wants you to be somewhat well-rounded. It wants you to have at least a little bit of everything. Or at least that's how it will appear to new players. Is that a better way to say it?
Yeah. I've got a little bit on that.
All right.
That I can talk about later if you want. Or
All right.
I don't feel that that's necessarily the case because I've played games where I specialized in just a couple areas.
Sure.
And and done really well.
Sure. You're probably right that when you start playing it more, you can definitely leverage specialization into doing very well. I guess my point is the way that the scoring system is set up is you will lose points for ignoring things entirely, but then you'll gain points for having lots of anything. You will gain up to 4 points, I think it is, in any given category.
Yeah, most categories have a cap.
Right. So most categories are you will get somewhere between -1 and +4 points per category. And then there will also be the cards, which in and of themselves will be worth victory points in many cases.
Yeah, I was going to say some, but not all.
And then your family is worth a lot of points. The size of your family, the size of your house, what your house is made out of. One of the weirdest things to say out loud to somebody when you're teaching them the game. And you'll evaluate all these things, and then when you end up with a point total, the person with the most points wins. This is the first of the farming games. The chat room has done some of my research for me. I very much appreciate that. It is good to point out that Bonanza was actually the first farming game, although it definitely doesn't really fall into the same series of games that Agricola is. But yeah, it was Agricola, then Le Havre, then At the Gates of Loyang, then Ora et Labora, and then according to Brandon, it goes to poop after that. He is incorrect, but that's fine. We'll come back to that later. So yeah, so he has a lot of games, but the trilogy, the true farming trilogy, is Agricola, Ora, and what is it? Fields of Arla.
Yeah,
that's the three that are like the farming trilogy. Le Havre and At the Gates of Loyang are also in that series, but they don't really play the same way at all. You don't do barely any farming in Loyang at all.
It's not the farming series, it's the harvest series.
The harvest series. Oh, dear sweet baby Jesus. All right, fine. Whatever. Anyway, he does a lot of farming games, people. No, it's all right. But Agricola is the first one. This is the one that sort of launched Uwe's foray into heavy medium or heavy Euro style worker placement games, right? That's the one thing these all sort of have in common is they're all a little bit on the heavier side. They're all worker placement of some variety. I guess maybe At the Gates of Loyang isn't, but the rest of them definitely are. Still, by many accounts, including the two gentlemen that are our guests today, Agricola, even if I think of it as the first in the series, is still the best in the series, right?
In my opinion, yes.
In your opinion? Okay. Chris?
I agree.
Okay. Why? Let's start with this. What is it about Agricola that makes it so good 10 years later? Because it's a 2008 game, 10 years now. What makes it so good?
For one thing, what he did so masterfully in Agricola is you can just get lost in playing the game. without even worrying about points, because you can see your farm build, and my farm looks different than your farm. And as we're doing things, and you went there and that denied the wood that I needed, so I'm going to adjust on the fly and go here. There's so much, the decision space in only 14 rounds, the way that it ramps with the necessity to feed. There's so much there. I'll say this, and I will probably get into it later. Even without all the expansions, because I've got a few different card decks and I've got Formers of the More, even without all that, I could still just sit down and play the base game and enjoy it just as much as I did the first time. Okay. You know, and one of the things is understanding that Agricola is not a game about thriving on your farm. It's about surviving and then trying to build your farm up as you do it. And when you know that, the stress becomes fun.
Okay.
You know, that oncoming harvest becomes fun. And the fact that, like I said, I think that's why it stands the test of time. At the end of the game, before we tally up the scores, I can look down and see what I created. And like I said, it's unique and it's fun, and I'm watching it build, and my animals are producing offspring, and I'm getting stuff off my fields. And it's just a game where I don't have to track points. I can just enjoy. The reward is in the play, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree that and I've talked about this in the show a number of times, that I'm a very big fan of games where I feel like there's a sense of accomplishment looking down when the game is over. It's actually one of the things that I like most about Eclipse as well, is when you're done with Eclipse, you're like, ha, look at what I have brought, you know. And there's that same sort of feeling in Agricola. Chris, how about you? What is it about Agricola? Is there anything that Jason didn't touch on that you really dig, or you just want to sing its praises first? Let's start.
Yeah. There. So why great game or greatest game ever? No,
Whoa.
I'm just kidding.
He's not kidding.
No, I love it. Okay, so I'll admit, the first time I played it, I didn't like it, and that's quite the statement for something that is now my favorite game. But I'm attracted to the theme. I'm actually from out in the country, so there's a little bit of that there. But I also think it's the best worker placement game I've ever played, and worker placement is one of my favorite mechanics. So that's one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to it. Just as a little bit of historical context, I'm a game historian, so I like to talk about this a little bit all the time. Is Caylus came out in 2005 or 6. Caylus was the first really big worker placement game.
Yes.
And Caylus, blew up the gaming hobby. Everybody loved Caylus. It was on everybody's, mind. Caylus actually inspired Rosenberg to make Agricola, and I think he took a lot of the bad parts that I don't like in Caylus out of Caylus, and he made a really tense worker placement game. So why does it work? I think most games that are really good games have a little bit of tension in them, and Agricola has a lot of tension. And I think a lot of Rosenberg's later designs took the tension out, and that really hurt them. So when there's 60 spaces like there is in
Feast for Odin.
A Feast for Odin. Yeah, so that's just not that tense to me. I'm not real worried about somebody else taking my space. But in Agricola, I might really need those cattle, or I might really need that wood, and you taking it from me has me stressed out not only on my turn, but on yours too. And I think that makes for an interesting game.
Okay. So there's a common thread that both Chris and Jason have said here, which is that there is a tension that they really like, that you like that there is a struggle here that you enjoy working against in order to succeed. Yeah, by the way, the chat room is taking you to task for talking smack about Caylus, and that's a whole nother. There will be a deep dive on Caylus coming.
Yes,
in the future, this will be happening. We've already had this kind of we've been talking about this one for a while. You guys have talked about the tension, and both of you have indicated that the tension is what sells this game for you. So let's say, however, that how do you sell this to somebody that maybe doesn't like tension? Because the other word that people can use in place of tension is punishing here, right? And there are certain games that go too far down the punishing road. And there are folks that would argue that Agricola is one of them. How do you counter that?
So I've never understood the comment that Agricola is punishing, and I'll just quickly share one anecdote why. I've played a lot of Agricola. We're talking hundreds of games, and I've never seen anybody take a begging card at all. I've never seen it happen. I've seen the computer do it, the AI. Have you done it?
Oh, yeah. Not one of my proudest moments, but absolutely. I have gotten hosed pretty hard on food. in a number of games.
You know, I've just never seen it as something that's that bad. I thought Kalis was punishing, and I think there of Steam and some of these other games where, like, if you don't play well, you are eliminated from the game. So I guess by comparison, Agricola never seemed that way to me. But
Okay.
maybe that's.
I've seen begging in, and this might just be a group dependent thing, but I would say that a solid 60 to 70% of the games of Agricola I've played have had somebody with begging at some point.
Yeah,
like
I've just never seen it at all.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this might be a group thing. Maybe we might just be dumber than you, Chris. Like, there's a very real chance that my gaming group is just not as smart as your gaming group. And for the record, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm dead on serious. I have looked at that. I've thought about this a number of times, but
well, I think begging cards, and so it's part of how I teach the game. So that probably, but
sure.
The Jeff City game group, at least, is not the brightest.
No, that's all right. That's all right. We're used to. We're used to.
I only said that because Brandon.
Oh no, we're aware of Brandon's capabilities. We got this.
Sorry, you guys are breaking up a little bit, so I wasn't hearing all my insults coming at me.
At first, it was funny because I thought that I heard you say the Jefferson City internet wasn't the greatest, and then I literally thought that's what you said because you were breaking up, and I'm like, oh no, never mind. He's making fun of Brandon. That's different. All right. So let's, Jason, do you feel like Agricola, does punishing the right word, or is it just tension?
No, I think it's tension. Chris brought up a good point when he talked about the worker placement, and I think that Agricola, because there's a difference between action selection and worker placement that some people don't get, and they'll call an action selection game worker placement, whereas with worker placement you have true, denial. Like he said, I got the wood, so you can't get the wood. I got the cow, so you can't, and that's tension. The punishing, again, like Chris said, if you teach going in and let them know what to expect, there are ways to get food. There are ways to do those things. Maybe you're not playing as optimally early on until you learn, because the thing about Agricola is learning early on. You get your cards and you go, okay, of these 14 cards, these 2 or 3, maybe 4 work well together, and I can build a strategy from there. And then from the start, you get your food engine going, and then you can start doing other things. And that's how I teach it, so that people, come out of the gate. And we also, especially with new people, we do it with a draft. So that way they can kind of, see what's going on instead of just the 10 and you discard 3, or just getting 7 of the occupations and the improvements. Yeah. But I do think it's tension, not punishing, but I do think I've heard Agricola described as being a gateway to and I don't think it's a really heavy game. It's a medium heavy, I'll say, but it's a gateway to whether if you like Agricola, you're probably going to like the more heavier, tense games. If you don't, you probably won't.
I would have never used the word gateway in a conversation with Agricola, but I see where you're headed with this. Like, it is a game that is sort of, it has that tension and that struggle, but it isn't so super pronounced that it's not like Age of Steam, like you talked about, where you can literally accidentally put yourself in a death spiral on turn 1 and then spend the next 3 hours waiting to die. Yeah, I get that. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about specific aspects of Agricola itself. First off, let's get a little bit of a baseline. Chris, you said that you played hundreds of games. Jason, do you have a ballpark on how many times you played?
I've played about 105, I think, at last count. Half on the iOS app, and then the other half on the table.
Okay. And Chris, when you were talking about your hundreds of games, were those split between the app and?
Yeah, I'd say 40 to 50 in person, and then probably a few hundred on the app. Mostly solo on the app, actually.
Oh, okay. So solo or against AI computer?
No, truly solo. The solo campaign on the app.
Gotcha. I have not played the app, in the interest of full disclosure. So I thought briefly about buying it today, so that way I could speak on it, and then I said no. And we'll come back to that, why I said no, in just a little bit. Brandon, how about you?
I've only played it a handful of times. I owned it when it was that ugly little Z-Man cube thing, and then I sold that and rebought it with the nice little Animeeples, and since then, coincident, I've played it about a handful of times.
Okay. I owned the original Z-Man version and then bought the meeple upgrade set that one of the companies was making back in the day and upgraded the meeples. But I never had the copy that had the official, whatever the meeples were part. I had like the aftermarket one. So I don't know which one that was. And I probably played, I'm going to say maybe 15, 20 plays back when I had it. And then I sold my copy like 4 or 5 years ago. It would have been 4 years ago because it would have been the first time I went to BGG. So that would have been, that would have been 2013, 2014, 2014. There you go. But I probably have 15, 20 plays of it in person under my belt. So this is just a baseline, so that way the chat room can understand where we're all coming from here. So as far as expertise and just flat out mileage goes, Chris and Jason, you have both Brennan and I beat by a long shot. So, but that's
usually the case.
Yeah, that's pretty fair in general. I tend to be a little bit of a dilettante when it comes to games. I'll play, like if I get 10 plays of something and I'm really excited about it. So let's start with the additions. And Chris, in the interest of full disclosure, Chris drew up a great bullet point of stuff that he thought were really salient points that I'm really excited to. So I'm literally just going to use your list, Chris, because I really like it. Let's talk about the additions. So I only played the original edition, the first edition that came out from Z-Man. I never played, and I never bought any of the extra decks, nor did I play the Mayfair reprint. So I have no frame of reference here. Which version now is the app? The new version?
So there's the old Z-Man copies. The really old Z-Man copies have. So the app, I don't know which version the app is actually. The old Z-Man copies didn't have the Animeeples. The newer Z-Man versions did have the Animeeples. The Mayfair version has Animeeples, and it's sort of the definitive version going forward. But most of the decks that have ever been made for the game, the old Z-Man version, and there's only I think one new full. And then there's the little color decks, the miniatures that you can buy. Here's one of them, and they each come with their own deck.
Nice. Nathan in the chat is saying that the app, by the way, is the old version. It's the Z-Man edition of the game, not the Mayfair edition. Makes sense because I feel like the app has been around longer than Mayfair's. Mayfair's printing has only been around since 2016.
Yeah, it's pretty new.
The app's been around longer, and the app does have the discs like the old version.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So your frame of reference is primarily so you play on the app is the old version, but you play in cardboard the new version?
Yeah, that's what I do.
Okay. And I'm going to guess then that since, with all due respect, I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you, Chris, but since you didn't know which version the app was off the top of your head, I'm going to assume that the games are similar-ish enough that there isn't a huge screaming difference where you're like, holy crap, that's wrong, right? It's basically the same game.
The new version has a couple of extra spaces that you can put in the game. The new version, if you have the extension, can go to 6 players, and the old version only went to 5. The base box only goes from 1 to 4 now, but the old version went from 1 to 5. And those are the biggest differences that I see.
Okay. But other than that, the game is fundamentally the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is this extra space. This is the biggest rule difference I've seen because we saw that question in the chat. That there is an extra space that you can put alongside the new version that gives you the chance early in the game to get animals. And that actually reduces a lot of the food stress too, which might be why I've never seen a begging card.
And we've never even used that extra space. So
is that's only for a larger player count though, is that correct?
I think it's 3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. With the new version, I've only played 2-player. We've played the new version probably 12 times, but only 2-player.
Okay, so you don't that extra space isn't involved in the games that you play.
No. It's been in the box from day one.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. Okay, so in general, so is it safe to say then that the new version is sort of the one that you two play the most?
Yeah, as soon as it came out, that's the one I play the most.
Okay.
I still tell people that really love Agricola, between the two, which one would I buy? The old version, just because there are so many cool decks for it, and I don't know if those will ever be made for the new version, but they're pretty similar.
Yeah. I agree, Chad. in the chat that I thought the rulebook was real bad in the Z-Man version as well, and Mayfair's rulebook has got to be better. Just if for no reason than by virtue of we've spent the last 8 years trying to learn how to write rulebooks better between 2008 and when they came out with it, right? Like you almost can't help it. It was real bad.
Yep.
All right. So
Thomas was saying some of those cards that they did rebalance them from old to new. So they've kind of changed those a little bit.
Yeah, because the swinginess, one of the things is whether you play with or without the cards. Tom in the chat says he plays the family rules with no cards more often than not. It seems like that's sort of, it seems like it's sort of split there, right? Like, do you tend to play with or without cards?
I only play with the cards.
Only with?
I prefer without.
You prefer without. Okay. So this is interesting. You're both coming at this game because I've only played with. I don't know that I ever played the Z-Man version without the cards at all because I'm one of those slightly pretentious old school gamer. I look how hardcore I am that whenever there's like here's the normal version and now here's the advanced rules, I'm always like, wow, we got this. Let's just get out all the things, And so I'm an idiot. And I always end up doing that to myself, which occasionally comes back to bite me in the butt. I'm just saying. I did not do that with High Frontier. That's about the only game I can think of. But yeah, so I've only ever played with the cards. When you play with cards, do you draft, Jason, or do you just take what you get dealt?
Usually, but there are times when we've got something. We're usually busy on weeknights, and if we've got enough time that we can get a game in without, we don't have too much time, then we'll just deal out 7 of each, and go from there. But if it's a game day and we've got time, we draft.
Okay, and is that because So one of my biggest issues with Agricola and why I ended up selling my copy years ago is that I didn't like the swinginess of the cards. To me, it felt like some cards were just patently more powerful than others, and no one had ever suggested drafting. And I hadn't been doing Magic drafts or anything like that when I had the game, so I didn't like that. Just was a thing that card drafting games as a genre didn't exist yet, or at least they weren't a real big deal at that point. So it never even popped into my head. What are your thoughts on the swinginess of cards? Is that a thing? Jason, I'm gonna start with you because you play with cards more often.
That's why we draft, honestly,
Yeah.
because it balances that out for one thing. The other reason I like to draft is because it allows you, like I said, you're not going to use all 14 cards, but it allows you to go, okay, I can use these 2 or 3 together as you're going, and you can look. It also adds a little bit of, because we do we don't do an open draft. I get 7 improvements. She gets 7 improvements. I take 1. She takes 1. We pass the other 6, and we do that. Because there's a little bit of extra tension if I'm looking at those 7 improvements and go, wow, these 2 work well together, and I grab 1. I'm hoping she doesn't take one of the other ones. But like I said, it eliminates that swinginess, because if I get dealt a hand of 7 great cards where I can make combos with 2 or 3 of them, you never get to see them. If I get the draft eliminates that.
Right.
So that's why that's why we like the draft, honestly.
Okay. Chris, you don't play with the cards more often than not. Does this factor into it all, or is it just a matter of light and speed?
So a couple of things on this. First, there is actually a deck where it's balanced with basically sub decks. It's the World Championship deck. So that one is sort of a happy medium. You don't have to take the time to draft, but it's balanced from the start. And so for people that don't like the time to draft, I really recommend that. But yeah, the cards actually have known different values. So there's a website, or used to be at least, called Play Agricola. There was a massive spreadsheet where people had sort of calculated a numeric value behind each card, and then they had play tested it heavily. Yeah, it's a known problem. The reason I don't play with cards isn't because they're swingy. I mean, we could draft them. They are swingy, but my reason is it takes what is a 45 to 60 minute game and make 90 to 105 minute game. Because not only do you have to take the time to draft the cards actually slow down gameplay quite a bit in the middle of the game. And so I don't like that. I like fast, short games, and so that's why I don't play with them.
Okay.
That's interesting. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
I said it's interesting. One of the things I love about Agricola is that, at least at 2-player, Donna and I play it with the cards in about 45 minutes.
Yeah, and so I will admit, I've played a lot of Agricola solo on the app. I play mostly, like, probably of my in-person plays, the vast majority would be 3 players. I very rarely have ever played 2-player Agricola.
Interesting. I think the most of the time that I played it, it was probably at 3 or 4. I don't think I played much in the way of 2-player either. I know for a fact I did not play 5 because I had talked to other people that were like, "Hey, Bill, don't do that." And
Yeah,
I said, really? I was like, "What? Wait, why? I like more people. More people is good." No,
We're doing it with 6 at Geekway, Chris. So don't start.
I don't think I could do
it. Well, when they released Caverna and they said that Caverna would play up to 7 players, and the first time I played Caverna was a 7-player learning game, and I said, "Holy crap! Why would you do this on purpose? Like, there's no reason for that game to have 7 players. You don't need a 5-hour worker placement game. That's insane."
I've heard that described as you really should just have a 3-player game of Caverna and at the next table a 4-player game.
Yes, dear God, yes. And I like long games, right? Like, I'm the guy that took Eclipse with every expansion and High Frontier 3rd Edition to BGG to play with randos, right? Like, so I love big, heavy games. And even I was like, no, this is insanity. This is not okay. This is not okay. All right. So let's talk about the Farmers of the Moor and the other decks. So to me, these all sort of fall into the same sort of category, which is ways to expand upon the base game. First off, how necessary are they? Like, they are not, according to Chris, no?
Yeah, well, I don't play with cards, but I mean, I own them all, of course, because I'm a completionist. But, some of the decks are better than others. Some of them are silly. I know that sounds like a weird thing to put in Agricola, but some of them are just playful and silly decks. Some of them are really serious, like the World Championship deck. The Gamers deck is probably my favorite. The Netherlands deck is pretty cool. The France deck is pretty cool. But, I mean, I didn't even add up how many of them there are, but there's a lot of them.
Okay. I'm sorry, Jason?
Yeah, there's thousands of cards. Now, we do play with the Gamers deck. I got that at HeavyCon last year. And that's our favorite deck. We've only played with about 3 or 4 different ones. As much as I like to be a completionist, some of those decks are just way out of my price range for a deck that I may not use. But Formers of the Moor, we do play with it when we play. But I will say this: I don't think they're necessary. The extra decks or the Formers, but they're both really nice to have. What Farmers actually, in my opinion, it does something interesting in that in some ways it reduces the tension, but in other ways it raises the tension. It reduces the tension that you start with certain areas of your farmland already covered. And if you don't clear those out, if you clear them out, you get things and you can build on them. But if you don't lose points, because normally every empty space is a negative point. So in that way, it reduces tension, but it adds tension in that you have to not only feed your family every harvest, but you have to heat. You have to. So you get that in some ways by clearing out the forest and the peat and stuff like that. So it's interesting that, like I said, we do use it, but I don't think it's necessary. Also, the little bonus actions, the cards that you can take where you can go get a horse or you can get a food and things like that, where as long as you have family members you haven't placed, you can go do that. That's another thing that in some ways lowers tension, but adds tension because now there's other things I want to do that you might take before I get to take them. So it's neat that it does that, in my opinion, that it really does expand on the base without changing the game so much. And like I said, in some ways lowers, in some ways raises the tension.
Gotcha. Okay. But not necessary. It's just
right.
Adding more variety than it is like actual complexity. Is that a fair way to sum it up?
Yeah, the app, you can get a couple of the decks in the app, but it doesn't offer the Farmers expansion. And I play the app just base, and it's just as fun. And Don and I, like I said, we can sit down at the table and play the base game just the same with the original cards and enjoy it just as much.
Cool. Okay. So it sounds like the app is getting pretty rave reviews from both of you. Brandon, have you played the app?
Yeah, I have. It's one of the few that I'll sit and play.
And you like it?
Yeah.
Do you play it on your phones or on tablets, folks?
I have fat fingers, so I play on my tablet.
Okay.
I have fat fingers and light wallet, so I play on my phone.
Nice.
I'm in the same camp as Brandon, yeah. As I play.
I've realized that I'm not much of an app gamer, so I have a ton of apps and I never play any of them. Like I have a tablet full of apps that I once in a while remember to go pick up, but I might. Okay, so full disclosure, I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation here. I have been taken to task for occasionally talking too much on my own show, so I apologize. But really fast, I really liked Agricola when it first came out. But it just seemed so mean. It just seemed so overly punishing, and I didn't want that kind of a mean play experience. Not because I couldn't handle it, because there are games that I really do like, but it didn't seem to fit with what I wanted from that theme. And so I ended up selling my copy, especially when Caverna came out. I sold my copy of Agricola. So that would be, I guess I could look that up on when that was. But whenever that was, that's when I sold Agricola, because Caverna did the same thing, but was less awful. There was less pain. It was less pain, not awful, because it's good. It's a good kind of pain for you guys. For me, it was like, I'm sick of starving. And now I am selling my copy of Caverna because I have a Feast for Odin, which does the same thing, but does it better, I think. So I guess, what is your comparisons between the other games? Have you played any of the other games in this series? Chris, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've played all of them. I actually think Caverna is pretty similar to Agricola, all else being equal. A lot of people are like, no, Caverna is much friendlier, less... I don't see that. In Caverna, you still have to feed your people. There's still a lot of tension for the spaces. After that, though, I think the games did become much more wide open. Fields of Arle feels like Agricola plus Farmers of the Moor plus a lot of other things. And A Feast for Odin, that was just like kitchen sink game design. He threw everything he could in that one.
That's fair. I feel like we're following Uwe's design arc. So as he gets new things, he sticks them into the latest version of the Also Here Are Sheep games. Right? Like, Jason, how about you? How many of these games have you played?
Everything but Caverna, because opposite of what you said, I think the fact that Caverna, again, I haven't played it. I've avoided it because people who have similar tastes have told me it's just like Agricola. It's not different enough, except that it's nicer or a little easier, a little more sandbox, and that's not what I want. So I've avoided it for that reason. I do like Feast for Odin. That was actually my Christmas gift from Donna this year, and we've played it 4 or 5 times in the last few weeks, and I really do enjoy it. But it hasn't knocked Agricola off as my #1 favorite, because as Chris pointed out, it's a good game, it's a fun game, I like it. But okay, so you took that space. I've only, even in a 2-player game, got 59, or even in a 4-player game, I should say, got 59 other spaces I can go to.
And by the way, can we just address the fact that there are 56 spaces or whatever it is on that Feast for Odin board that is half the size of the board of Agricola and has 3 times as many action spaces, and you have to put multiple meeples in each one? Like, I just want to go over and smack somebody for that. That's the one thing.
I have never said this about any other game, but that was the one game, Agricola, that needs those mini Euro cards.
Yes.
Rather than the full-size cards for action spaces, it needs the small ones.
Yeah.
Dear publishers, if you use many Euro cards, I'm going to hate you. But this was the one time where it was okay.
Well, when you have hands that are basically made out of bratwurst, I feel your pain, right? Like, it's anytime every once in a while, I got sent a prototype of a game that had a deck of 240 mini Euro cards that all had to be shuffled. And it's like, nope,
wow.
You're done. Not a chance in hell, folks. Sorry. Nah, not going to happen. So, all right. So, if you had, obviously Agricola is at the top for you guys. Do you trick out your copies? You have it extra sexy?
So show and tell time. I'm sorry to do this.
This is why Chris put this in his checklist, because he wanted to show off stuff.
Recently, they released miniatures. So if you want to attract Ameritrash players to Agricola, the miniatures are how to do it. But my favorite thing, this is completely gratuitous. This is a wooden board with plastic holders, so everything snaps nicely in place, so you don't mess up your Agricola board when you're playing it. So,
I don't hate that idea at all. I mean, I have been shoulder checked into oblivion a few times in various games. It's not Terraforming Mars bad when it happens in Agricola because there isn't, the same cubes in 12 different locations you have to remember the locations of. But yeah, that's kind of cool. Would you make that yourself? Hold that back up to the camera.
So
Did you make that?
No, you can buy them through like Top Shelf Gamer and places.
Okay.
But yeah, they're pretty cool. And then the minis are cool too, but they are, somebody said in the chat, Chad said in the chat, they're really expensive. The minis are just completely overpriced. I hope the price comes down. And then I have one of those Stonemeyer premium upgrade kits.
Yeah. Yeah, those are cool. Eclipse without the trays, Nathan. You are speaking my language there. Yes, I agree. Okay, wait a second. So you have, the copy that you have does it have the discs or meeples or what is it?
So I have the meeples. So I have both versions. I have the old Z-Man and I have the Mayfair. The new version comes with the meeples, but I mostly bought these little miniatures because they each come with a deck of cards too.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
I really am a completionist and have to have all the cards.
Gotcha. Jason, how about you? What does your copy of Agricola look like?
I have the Mayfair, the anniversary edition. I did have the Z-Man, but when that was another one, Donna got me the Mayfair as a gift for my birthday, and I gifted my Z-Man to someone because they were worried it was too heavy. And to my knowledge, it's been sitting there for like a year and a half, and they've never played it.
That is,
and
awful.
It breaks my heart. I kind of want to just offer to pay the shipping to have them send it back.
Hey,
so I can
just
give
send
it
the
to
damn
someone
thing
else.
back. If you're not going to play it, or pass it on,
Right.
pay it forward, give it to somebody. Dear God.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I haven't gotten the miniatures for the exact reason that Chris mentioned. I felt like they were just too much for what they offered, and plus, again, like I said, I'm a woodworker. I like having the wooden bits. So,
my Z-Man copy, I had the discs, right? And I printed out there were stickers that somebody made on BGG that had like faces that you could glue onto your pieces of wood. So that way you had like actual people on your wooden discs, which sounds stupid. But what I discovered is if you double-sided 2 discs, you put a face on 2 of the discs, and then you single-sided the other 3, then if you instructed people, okay, flip those over, you can only use a dude, because one of the biggest problems when I would teach the game is people would just grab a disc. They wouldn't grab one of the 2 from their house. And so we very often had people that were placing, that would try to place a 3rd or 4th meeple, and you're like, no, you can't do that. It's not a big deal, but it was an easy way to lighten the cognitive load. So that was one thing that I did. And then other, like restocking the board cheat sheets. I had a bunch of those in my copy as well. There was one thing, it was like a slider, right? So on turn 1, the slider would be here, and it would you could lay all the stuff on it between rounds and then just peel all the stuff off of it, and you would have exactly enough things to restock the board. And then turn 2, you'd slide it out a little more. So I did a lot of that kind of like deluxeificationizing, but I didn't do like extra buying stuff. Like I never bought extra decks for my copy, etc.
Interesting that you mentioned that, because on the app they have it's the discs, but it's the little faces.
Yep.
Like the different people. Yeah.
Yeah, it just that was one of the only things that I ever did besides buying the Animeeples. I did buy the Animeeples too, because I will be damned if I want to farm cubes. Like I like cubes, they're fine. My show's called the Cubist. They're part of the logo. There's cubes everywhere. That's great, but they need to be animals. Man, you're putting them in a little pasture with little fences. They got to be animals, right? Can you farm with cubes, Jason? You're the guy that you want to turn all the Eclipse ships into hunks of wood. Farming with cubes is okay.
I never actually had that. Even the Z-Man copy I got had it was the later versions that had the anime.
They had the Animeeples. Okay, cool. Good.
But again, I love an amazing game like El Grande that has cubes. I mean, that game is the F-bomb. And so
thank you for being on the show, Jason. That was really nice of you. I'm sorry that your internet connection's about to drop. Damn it. Patrick's not here to defend you, sir. Get out of here. Whatever. Fine. El Grande's probably fine. It's not. It's terrible. All right. Excuse me. Sorry. All right. If you had to sell Agricola to somebody that has never played any of the farming games, and you had to give them like a 30, you are working in the booth, okay? And somebody's like, what's this? And they hold up a copy of Agricola, and you're the guy that is in charge of giving them a 30-second sales pitch and getting them to buy the game. What do? Start with Chris.
It is one of the greatest worker placement games ever designed. It plays well at all player counts from 1 to 4 players. You can get an extension for 5 or 6 players. Don't do that. And it's infinitely expandable because of the different decks of cards.
Okay. Jason?
I have to follow that?
Yes, you do.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'll just say that it's a game that you can get lost in the creation, in the process, in the actions. It's a game where you really are taking a journey, you know, and in that regard, it's a game where I'm not counting victory points. I'm not doing this. I'm adjusting on the fly as you mess me up. And it's that feeling of what I've accomplished at the end, despite not always being able to do what I wanted at the time.
All right, that's pretty good.
That's the best I can come up with since Chris hit like 3 of the points I was going to say.
Brandon, how about you?
I'd give them all creatures big and small, and then they'll eventually want something bigger and better.
So
that game is a travesty and should have never been created.
I've got more plays of that than I do of Agricola. But
I've never played all creatures big and small, but now I kind of want to have an entire episode where Chris and Brandon just shout at each other for half an hour about how bad it is. Makes me miss Dice Tower Showdown.
If you have the extra buildings, it's fine, but otherwise that game feels solvable to me. So
Gotcha. For me, I would say that if you don't mind the feeling of failure along with your sense of accomplishment, Agricola is for you. You have to be okay. Well, no, I'm actually not being entirely sarcastic here. You have to be okay with the idea that the best laid plans of mice and men are going to go horribly awry in that game. That you're going to want to do something and it's not going to work, and then you're going to have to go to like drop down to like plan F by the time you're done because the other people at the table are terrible and did all the things that you wanted to do.
So, Bill, can I tell a 30 story?
I wish you would.
So I have long played Agricola 3 players with my sister and my brother-in-law. It's one of our favorite games to play as a group, and they're some of my most frequent gaming partners. My mother loves games. I'm from a gamer family, but we've never played anything remotely heavy with her. And she specifically asked, I mean, we all grew up on a farming, community, specifically asked about a month ago to play Agricola. My mother is 55 years old, has never played a heavy game in her life, but she's played a lot of lighter ones. We sit down, me, my sister, and my brother-in-law are going at it the entire time. I add up at the scores at the end, and my mother, who's never played the game before, won. And by the way, didn't take a begging card for those of you that said you took a begging card. I am ashamed to admit that 3 very experienced Agricola players lost to a newbie, and she has not let us stop mocking us for the past month. She describes it as that game where you make bread that I'm really good at.
That's awesome. First up, I would just like to point out that your inference that 55 years old is some sort of like old age watermark worries me slightly as the resident graybeard in the group, but that's fine. Just throwing that up. Yes, Chris's mom is better than me at this game. Thank you, Chad, for nothing. Now send me your damn copy of Kinkopolis. No, it's fine. No, here's the deal. I really need to try this game again with the Mayfair edition. I feel like with the newest version of it, with the cards having been tweaked a little bit, with the extra space for a 3 or 4 player game, so that way you can get animals into play a little bit faster, and with my wider knowledge and taste in games now, because we all are sort of on a journey as gamers, right? Like we were talking about this pre-show. We have chat room, you guys, some of you know this, but for those of you that don't, there's always a little bit of a pre-show thing where we're getting together and we're kind of going over the basics of how the show's going to work, and just a little bit of chit chat to kind of warm up before we actually hit the play button. And Jason had mentioned that he's been a gamer now for about 5 years, right, Jason? Is it? Did I get that right? Okay. And he said he wasn't sure if that was for good or for bad. And I said that I think it's great because he can go back through and enjoy all these wonderful games that have been around for years. The other half of that, though, is that as you play games, your tastes change as you are exposed to new and more games. And sometimes I think it's worth going back to older games after you have been gaming for a long time, and you can like revisit them and see whether you would approach them with a different mindset than you did when you first played it. I think I would probably really like Agricola now, but when I sold it after I got Caverna, my reasons were just as valid then. The reasons aren't more or less valid. It's just that you change as a gamer. And I think and Uwe's design style reflects that as well. That is his journey as a game designer, as well as our journey as a player, right? Is he's taking this basic idea that he came up with 10 years ago and just iterating on it and doing things that he finds interesting. I think that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, this man started with Bonanza 20-something years ago, and now he's at A Feast for Odin. I'm a little bit afraid of what comes next.
Turnip farming.
Nice. Well, Newsfjord, right? Didn't Newsfjord come next, which is like a big step backwards in complexity? All right, like, isn't it? From what I heard,
it's
go ahead.
I was going to say, Newsfjord is on the level of complexity of, say, Glass Road.
Yeah, it's a big step back in fun.
Yes, we played it together.
I haven't had a chance to play it yet, and first off, Brandon's such a curmudgeon anyway that I would worry his curmudgeonness.
I assure you, Brandon is the least curmudgeonly in our game group.
I love you, Brandon.
Oh, man. See, Chris has kind of turned me, though. He's made me this little 20 to 30 minute game player anymore. So
I gotcha.
But we're going to try War of the Ring. We'll change all that. So,
well, or it'll definitely do something to all that. I don't know if it'll change it, but there you go. Very cool. All right, so I think this is a lot of fun. Chat room, you guys have done a great job keeping us honest on this, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much, Chris and Jason, for coming on the show and talking about this. I hope that we did your game justice. I'm still not convinced it's better than the other games, but I definitely need to revisit it. I think you have at least convinced me that I need to go back and see if what I think about it now, with my 2018 sensibilities and what I like about games. Very cool. All right, shameless plug time. Chris, if people wanted to know more about you, what would they? Do you have a social media presence that you care about?
No,
that you care about.
I live like it's 1955 and still use carrier pigeons, but I write for the Opinionated Gamers. I occasionally write for the What Did You Play This Week written blog. I post reviews on Board Game Geek. I'm in Gamers Alliance and Counter Magazine, so I'm in a few places, but almost always written. I don't have the voice for radio or the face for video, so thank you for bearing with me today.
I think you did great. Yeah. Jason, how about you? Where would people know more about you?
On Twitter, it's Jason Dinger without the E on my last name because that was taken. So just JASONDINGR. And that's where I'm most active as far as gaming and stuff like that. As far as plug, Cabins of the Golf is still on slate for this Essen from Spielworks. Howard Leesky, the artist, is supposed to start next month. He's been busy finishing things up with Ground Floor Second Edition is coming out by Spielworks earlier this year, and he's doing some stuff for that. So I'm getting all the reference stuff together because I want the timeline of the game. I want to be like, say, the post-World War II 1950s fishing, the old wooden hull boats. That's when my grandfather ran shrimp boats. So I'm getting a bunch of reference stuff together. So I'm really excited about that to be able to see. I have my prototype art I painted, but to be able to see the official version. And other than that, what I'm really excited about, I'm working on a game right now called The Acadians, Life of the Early Cajun Settlers. And my goal there is to design a game that's publisher worthy that I can give away free as a PNP. And that's just something I grew up. I grew up, in poverty, and I work with children today from just bad situations at home and things like that. And so not everybody can afford to buy $50 games. Not everybody can afford to buy $20 games. And so I want something I can just I want to be able to give away. And so unfortunately, you and Chris broke my heart talking about the little Euro cards because I wanted to make this game easy and inexpensive to print and play. So I had the standard magic-sized cards, and I reduced them. I found a way to reduce all the information on the little Euro cards.
Jason, all you got to do is make it okay if people upload an Arts Cow deck, and they can print embiggened cards for themselves, right?
Or I'll just have 2 PDFs.
Yeah, exactly.
One with the big cards and one with the small cards.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. There you go. And for the record, dear viewers / listeners / whatever, Chris was a super nice guy. The one time I got to meet him in the creepy basement at the church, that was a lot of fun. And Jason is one of the kindest and most generous guys I've ever met on social media. You two are both just truly stand-up dudes. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Brandon, you are also awesome. You know that I love you. I'm sorry that I called you a curmudgeon.
Yeah, that's okay. I've kind of lived up to it the past few weeks.
Cheap plugs, sir.
Cheap plugs. Oh, sorry. You were getting to that. You used to be able to find me in that creepy basement, but since then, I haven't been able to be found there.
You haven't been at the creepy church basement for a while?
It's not that creepy. I don't know what you're talking about.
Chris is agreeing with me. Thank you, Chris. Damn it.
You can find me on the What Did You Play This Week podcast and over on the What Did You Play This Week website. And you can hear Chris, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We got him to record something with us where we talked about what makes a game a classic and whether we think there are classics still being produced. So that should be coming out sooner or later. And we are also proud members of Punchboard Media,
where we all bring something to the table.
There you go, Bill.
See, I was leaving it for you this time because you yelled at me the last couple times because I did it without you. All right. And ladies and gentlemen, always, you can find all things Cubist related at thecubistpodcast.com. Please consider supporting the show via buying some merch or supporting us on Patreon. I know that Patreon are occasionally big jerk faces, but it's already set up and Pod Pledge is weird, and I'm not exactly sure how to go about changing this over. So for right now, we're sticking on the Patreon train. We may be making some changes in the future, but not anytime soon. So go check out the merch and support us on Patreon if you are so inclined. More importantly, thank you so much for watching and enjoying the show. We hope you all had a great time. We have a schedule for next week. Does anybody remember what it is? Do you remember? I don't remember.
Oh,
do you know? Bill. I don't know. I don't know things. Look, just because it's my show doesn't mean I have to remember all the things.
Keep babbling for 2 seconds.
I got it right here. It's the Gateway and Next Step games.
Yep. With
Calliope Games. Yes.
Yes. We're not sure who is going to be there from Calliope. But yeah, that's who it's going to be with.
Yeah. So next week, we're going to talk all about what makes a game a gateway game or a next step game. I'll see if I can work Agricola into the conversation on your honor, Jason, if you'd like. No? All right. Not going to happen. All right. Everybody have a fantastic week of gaming, and we will talk to you all again real soon. Be good. Thanks. Bye. Later.